Good day, and thank you for watching this quick overview training on the 2022 Denver Energy Code Residential Compliance Pathways. This training was developed in conjunction with Community Planning and Development and the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency. If you download the PDF version of this training, you can access links to many other resources and training opportunities provided throughout. Let's begin by taking a moment to review how residential buildings are defined in the Denver Energy Code. You see on this slide that residential buildings are detached 1 and 2 family dwellings and multiple single-family dwellings and group R3 and R4 buildings 3 stories or less in height above grade plane. You'll see that this definition is actually in section C 202. The reason the residential buildings are defined in the commercial code is because some townhomes are permitted under that code. Note that the phrase 3 stories or less applies to all building types, so only a 4-story townhome, for example, would need to comply with the commercial provisions of the code. Updates to the 2022 Denver Energy Code supports Denver emission reduction goals by incentivizing electrification. All electric properties have an easier path to compliance. It's important to understand what qualifies as an all-electric property, therefore, in the code. So let's go to the slide and see what the definition of an all-electric property is. An all-electric property is one that contains no permanently installed equipment or appliances that utilize combustion, plumbing for fuel gas or fuel oil or fuel gas utility connections installed within the buildings or site, except for emergency power systems and standby power systems. So to recap, an all-electric property is one that has no operational gas appliances or mechanical systems, including gas lines for fire pits or barbecues, and no permanently installed gas connections, with the exception that gas is allowed for emergency power systems and standby power systems installed in the home. The Denver Energy Code allows for a variety of prescriptive and performance-based compliance options to demonstrate that your project complies with the Denver Energy Code. You should become familiar with all compliance options so you can choose which one is best for your project. The code allows for these options to provide flexibility in demonstrating compliance, while the city is incrementally moving toward net zero energy homes. The performance-based pathways, Total Building Performance, and Energy Rating Index offer the most flexibility. Now let's look specifically at each of the compliance options, beginning with the prescriptive pathway. There are 2 options for the building thermal envelope compliance within the prescriptive section of the code. Option 1 uses the assembly U-factor and R-value tables, and option 2 is a trade-off approach that uses total area weighted U-values. Option 1 is a straight prescriptive pathway that requires each assembly in the building thermal envelope to meet a maximum U-factor or a minimum R-value set in the code. For example, an R60 attic insulation, R20 plus 5 wall insulation, or windows with a U-value of 0.27. In essence, you can install better performing materials in an assembly, not less performing than that called out by the 2 tables. If you happen to install layers of insulation, such as a flash of foam and then blown fiberglass in a wall assembly, you are allowed to add those R values together to determine compliance. This compliance option is the most straightforward, but the least flexible compliance option available. There are a few assemblies in the prescriptive U-factor and R-value tables that I want to draw your attention to. This table summarizes the revisions in the Denver Energy Code over the 2021 IECC that require increased thermal performance for some assemblies. Note that this slide only highlights those assemblies that have been amended. Be sure to fully familiarize yourself with the full table and all requirements before selecting a compliance option. It is also important to carefully review all the footnotes in these tables. The footnotes explain notations and provide additional context on the requirements. For example, one important new footnote in the Denver 2022 Energy Code considers the percentage of glazing to set the fenestration U-factor. The values in these tables are based in sound building science to create high-performance building. For some assemblies, such as wood-framed walls, multiple options are provided that combine cavity and continuous insulation. This is noted with the CI following the R value. CI stands for continuous insulation. These insulation values are designed to work in conjunction with the vapor retarder requirements in the Denver Residential Code to prevent condensation in what is called the first condensing surface, while at the same time promoting drying potential within the assembly. The second prescriptive compliance option for the building thermal envelope is called the total UA alternative. UA stands for area weighted U value, and this is a software modeling compliance approach. While there are multiple softwares available that can calculate the total UA of a building, only ResCheck, a free tool developed by the U.S. Department of Energy, will be adapted to include the Denver amendments to the IECC. The 2022 Denver Energy Code revision of ResCheck is still in development and will be available in the fall of 2023. An interim workaround policy is discussed in more depth in a recording of the prescriptive compliance training available on the City of Denver's website. Software-based energy code compliance offers more flexibility because it allows for trade-offs between envelope assemblies. A trade-off refers to putting something more in one assembly so that you can put something less in another, while keeping the performance scale the same. Under the total UA alternative pathway, you can trade off only R values and U factors of the different assemblies. So for example, the blue ball here might represent ceiling insulation at R38 instead of what would prescriptively be required at an R60. In order to trade off that lower R value, the three silver balls would have to represent better window or wall assemblies that exceed the minimum prescriptive tables, thus balancing the energy equation. Prescriptive compliance requires that a project complies with the entirety of all applicable provisions in sections R401 through R404 and also R408. Here's an overview of what is required. You should become familiar with these requirements before submitting your plans for permitting. Projects following prescriptive path must also select additional efficiency measures to meet the requirements of Section R408. The new credit method increases flexibility for prescriptive compliance with a variety of efficiency measures to choose from, while still promoting a more energy-efficient building than previous code cycles. The number of credits a project must comply with is dependent on building type and whether it is an all-electric home or not. All-electric buildings have an easier path to compliance in order to promote building electrification that aligns with the net zero energy goals of the City of Denver. While mixed-fuel buildings must achieve 18 credits from Table R408.1, all-electric properties only need to achieve 3 credits in addition to space heating and water heating equipment requirements. More information on the additional efficiency requirements is available in the recorded prescriptive compliance training. Now let's look at the requirements for the total building performance and energy rating index compliance options. The total building performance path is a whole building energy model software compliance option. This compliance approach allows for greater options for trade-offs, as one can not only trade off U factors and R values, but can trade off improved air or duct tightness, for example, for lower assembly R and U values. The total building performance approach uses annual energy costs as the metric to determine if the proposed home is equal to or better than the same house built to the prescriptive U and R value tables. The required energy cost savings are different for all electric properties to incentivize electrification. An all-electric building must have an annual energy cost budget that is 5% better than a code-compliant reference building as defined in the Energy Code. All other buildings must have an annual energy cost budget that is 18% better than a code-compliant reference building. Projects that follow this pathway require energy modeling, which can be completed by an energy rater or other design professional. The Energy Rating Index, or ERI, compliance option uses whole building energy modeling to show compliance. The ERI score compares the energy performance to a baseline rather than energy cost. The baseline design has a score of 100 and represents the approximate efficiency of a home built to the 2006 IECC. The ERI score is determined using energy modeling software that meets the requirements in the code and can be performed by an energy rater. The Denver Energy Code Section R406 requires that the Energy Rating Index score of the proposed building be less than or equal to the score that is listed in Table R406.4. As with other compliance pathways, all electric properties have an easier path for compliance with a maximum ERI score of 55. All other buildings must be more energy efficient with a maximum allowable Energy Rating Index score of 50. More in-depth information about this pathway is presented in a long-form performance compliance training available on the City of Denver's website. In addition to the energy modeling requirements of the Total Building Performance or Energy Rating Index pathways, projects following either of the compliance options must also meet the requirements of all sections listed in tables R405.2 or R406.2 respectively. If you choose the Total Building Performance or Energy Rating Index alternative compliance approaches, be sure to familiarize yourself with these requirements. For those familiar with the previous versions of the code, it's worth noting that there is updated language in the 2021 IECC and the 2022 Denver Energy Code. The codes no longer use the term mandatory or prescriptive to differentiate between requirements. All applicable requirements are identified within each compliance pathway. One last note is that additional energy efficiency packages in Section R408 are only required for projects following the prescriptive compliance path and are not required when using either the Total Building Performance or Energy Rating Index pathways. Thank you very much for listening to this 2022 Denver Energy Code Residential Compliance Pathway Overview. I encourage you to take advantage of more in-depth trainings that have been recorded and posted on the City of Denver's website and can be found by navigating to the links listed on this slide. In addition, there are a number of compliance resources, including checklists and the like, that can be found on the city's website. Take care and happy building.